I've often had to work twice as hard to get only half as far. And it's hard. It's difficult.
Welcome to the Executive Espresso podcast, a sharp and to-the-point leadership podcast with insights from some of Australia's top executives. In today's episode, I'm joined by Ruby Yadav, the ex-CEO of global superannuation services provider Mercer. Ruby is a uniquely inclusive leader with a vibrant background in risk and senior leadership. Ex-Chief Risk Officer at UniSuper Superannuation, Ruby champions inclusive leadership and innovation. Enjoy the conversation and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes. Before we jump into the episode, we're on a mission to get to 5,000 subscribers. So if you enjoyed this episode and want some more, please hit the subscribe button. Enjoy the chat with Ruby. Morning, Ruby, and welcome to the Executive Espresso.
Thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
And thank you for inviting me to your beautiful home to do this.
My pleasure.
Thank you. So before we jump into the conversation, looking back at your career, you've got such an impressive resume, right? From various different roles and various different opportunities. So before we jump in, I'd love to hear about what first drew you to the world of risk and what's kept you entertained over the years.
Yeah. I wish I could say it was planned and organized and there was something that sparked my interest, but I can't. Purely accidental. Accidental. I studied zoology.
Wow.
And then I started working in the contact centers. Accidentally, I fell into training, and then I was training risk and compliance professionals. And I think it was just sort of navigating, picking up skills along the way. When I was working in the compliance space, I suddenly thought, oh, I think I'm actually good at it.
Yeah.
And I actually enjoy it as well. So maybe now let's not let the rest of my career be too accidental and be a little bit more deliberate about it. So that's how I started in it. But in what's kept me interested in there was really, I just love the balcony view you get in that as well. I think every other role that I was doing before that was just really narrow and just working in your own lane and doing the one thing that I was doing. And this was the first time when I thought I had the balcony view. I could see the bigger business. I could connect the dots nobody else was connecting. And I think the insights that I started to get for myself, the learning that I was getting for myself, I think was just really got me hooked onto it. And then everything else is history from there.
A lot of time, people on the outside look at the risk and compliance portfolios and divisions as a little bit of gatekeepers.
Yep.
Right? And a lot of the time I hear the conversation that, risk and compliance operates in a very black and white area where some decisions need to be in that gray area. How do you communicate the value of what you do as a business partner to the rest of the business?
Yeah. You're right about the gatekeeper. I've been introduced as the police person, not the policeman, the police person, the gatekeeper, handbrake to happiness, you name it, and I've been called that as well. I think the turning point for me came when I joined the ANZ Bank. That was I was truly in my risk sort of career, and I'd left consulting quite deliberately because I didn't just want to be dishing out reports. And I wanted to actually be part of the change and make something happen. So once I landed there, luckily for me, the very first early days, they had this big offsite, 2 days, lots of planning. And then somewhere along the way, they're like, and there's a new compliance person in the team. Let's introduce her. And I said nothing about compliance. I said, oh my God, I'm blown away by the work you're doing. I was part of the digital banking. And that's when digital wasn't a thing. And I said, I can see the possibility. I can see the aspiration. And I said, I was with another bank at the time. And I said, I just cannot for the life of me work on that bank or work with that bank because of the experience. And here you are trying to turn that around. And I want to be part of making that change happen with you. So I'm so excited to be here. Like the word risk never came. And I think it just changed the tone of them actually going, oh, you're actually here to help us. And then everything else sort of unfolded from there. Some of the people I worked with then are still friends and mentors and people we still learn from. But it's really just changing the narrative and the language of you're not there to do your business of risk. You are there to use the risk discipline to help them be more successful.
Yeah.
Once you can make that connection, I think the sentiment and the language, everything changes after that.
It sounds like you've approached, especially that type of conversation, with a lot of integrity and a lot of self-awareness, and with a view of being authentic to those people that you've just met. Right? Has that been a conscious decision of yours over the years to approach those conversations with empathy and with authenticity, or is it something that you've had to learn over the years?
I think I've always been geared that way as a human being, but that's not to say I've always been self-aware. I think integrity unquestionable, but that awareness piece, I can't say that I was very self-aware at the time that I was talking about. I am someone who wears my heart on the sleeve. So I think it was more heart than a thoughtful, I need to pitch it a certain way. And I think that awareness and self-awareness is something that I had to develop over the time. That's played a very, very big part in who I am today. But that was definitely a learned skill. I didn't have that at the time.
Was there a moment in your career that stands out for you where being true to yourself actually came with a bit of a risk?
Too many of them. It's I think it's, what do you call it? The professional hazard. I think being in the role that I've been most part of my career, I think wearing the risk hat, being somebody challenging, questioning, and not necessarily to prove somebody else wrong and prove yourself right. But I think my job often is to elicit an alternate point of view to make sure we're looking at all possibilities. And therefore, I'm often always trying to ask the questions that nobody's asking or raise something that nobody's raising, because that's how you open up sort of the field of your view and what you're trying to do. It comes with a lot of risk, because I think as human beings, we are wired to be biased towards our own ideas, right? And somebody challenging that doesn't always go down well. So I think that's part of it's learning how to position that. And I think a big learning for me there was, so in the early parts of my career, Virg, I said things as I saw them. I was like, I see it, I'm going to call it, right? And I go integrity, honest, I'm going to do it. And I still stand by that. None of that changes. But I think somebody gave me a good piece of advice and said, it's important to go, what do they need to hear? But also, how do they need to hear it? Yeah. So I think working on the how does somebody need to hear that truth or that position, I think that was a finesse that I've had to develop over time as well. But in my days when I perhaps wasn't as thoughtful about putting that sort of point of view forward, I've been asked to do things that are point blank said not happening. And that did cost me, I think, almost cost me my career, not the job. But I could see my growth in that role then automatically became stunted. I was not necessarily the person who was supported, advocated for. And even later on as well, I think there was a particular instance where we were chasing a big, hairy goal. And everyone was just so ultra focused on it and go, what's the shortest, fastest way of getting there? And suggestions were put on the table about how we could get there in record time. And I didn't agree with that. And I had to put my foot down and I go, I don't agree with it. But I think that's the what do they need to hear and how do they need to hear it? The how do they need to hear it part was, I know how important this is for us to succeed. You have my personal commitment that we will get there. But I will decide how we get there. Because it did relate to something that had to happen within my function, how I report certain things. So I did have accountability. I said, but I will decide how we get there. And I have full accountability. And it was a very career limiting conversation at the time. But we did make it happen. But I knew there was big personal risk involved. If we didn't get there, it would have had consequences. And I was told that point blank on the day. And I said, I accept that.
Yeah, wow.
So, yeah.
I think that goes back to having that balance with integrity and doing the right thing and being true to your values, right? And what you stand for. Because that reputation follows you. Right?
Absolutely.
As we know, especially in small markets. Yeah. So do you have any habits or practices that you follow or that you keep you grounded and aligned to those values that you believe in?
Yeah, I think probably not habits, maybe the way of thinking and how I approach situations and decisions. I think I like simplification. I think there's enough complexity in the world around us. The way we work needs to be really simple. So I just try and break things down and organize my thinking. You just said it's about doing the right things. I then add another dimension to it and go do it the right way as well. Right? And what does that right way look like is sometimes where people can cut corners and do things a certain way. Nobody wakes up and, to try and do the wrong things. It's then when we get super focused around a goal or an objective, you can lose sight of how you're actually getting to that point. And probably an analogy that I often use with my teams, my people, is if your goal is to grow flowers, people get absolutely obsessed about other flowers blooming, other flowers blooming, other flowers blooming. And I go, actually, you know what? Don't worry about it. Because be clear that your goal is to grow flowers, but then worry about the sun, the soil, the water. The flowers will come. And I think when I see a lot of the reporting mechanism, I do a lot of that in the governance sort of space as well. Even, when I was a CEO in the last 2 years and working through some tough financial conditions as well, it was all about where are the numbers, where are the results, where are the outcomes. Whereas I think shifting the conversation and perspective to how are we getting there, and I think lining up people behind that, I think that is probably the one pattern that has served me well over and over, regardless of which role I was doing or what problem I was solving.
Yeah. I think sometimes, and I've spoken to a few other guests on the show where they speak about sometimes the incentive is wrong, and that they, your people that you're leading along the journey start looking at ways to cut corners, etc., in order to get there, right? And you've mentioned something really interesting there around sometimes it is, especially being the CEO of a large organization, it's about the revenue, right? You've got shareholders and stakeholders that keep asking you for the numbers, and I think, being very, very values driven, sometimes leaders find it very tough to strike that balance between delivering good numbers and what that looks like, but then also staying grounded and ensuring that the decisions reflect both the business and the human kind of centered values. Right? How have you, over the years, come to grips with that? Is it a philosophy that you've sort of that has sort of led you along the way or followed, or leaning on mentors, or can you walk me through that?
Yeah, I think it's probably all of those things and some more. And that's been a learned skill as well, because some of the things didn't come naturally to me. Being an advisor all my life, I think looking at numbers with that level of precision and all of that didn't come naturally and automatically. So that was learned as well. For me, I think I'm a big believer that human-centered values, as we call it, humanity and integrity, 3 things. It's just non-negotiable regardless of how tough things get. I think having that very strong anchoring point has always helped. That doesn't mean that other things didn't go wrong and there weren't consequences. There was all of that, right? But it was that unwavering belief of, if that's what it needs to be, then that's what it needs to be. The starting point was always humanity, integrity, just non-negotiable. Always hold on to that. If anything else slips, it can, but you can't let that slip. But the reality of a commercial world is that you can't let other things slip as well. And that's where you start building the strategies. I don't need a strategy to be human. That's just who I am. But how do I manage the numbers, the expectations, sometimes the competing demands as well? I think that's where being honest, I think, was probably the one thing that served me really well. And what I mean by that is, I've we've all seen big brands and logos. I've worked with some of them as well. The customer is the center of your world, and member first is the whole industry within superannuation as well. And that's absolutely hands down true. But I think if anyone thinks that they can achieve that at the expense of leaving their people behind, leaving their boards behind, leaving their regulators behind, it's just not the reality. So you've got to be honest that you've got to take everyone along. And I think that is an art and it's a learned skill all at the same time. I didn't always get it right. I think I've made plenty of my mistakes, and that's the joy of learning that I've enjoyed as well. But I think it's how do you then organize yourself? I talked about here's a goal and then here's a pathway. And then who's on that pathway with you as well, taking all the constituents with you. I think that was probably what served me well as well. In one of my commercial roles, it was about taking the clients with me. There were challenges in the experience. It's just the market, consolidation, regulation, so much happening that I think a few things were out of kilt and they were affecting our clients. And yes, ultimately we're serving the members, but there's other obligations along the way as well. And I think it took just having that honest conversation of where exactly we were as a business, what exactly we could do for them, knowing what they needed. But when I couldn't get them there, just going, I actually can't. If I can't get you there, what's the place that is still acceptable, better than where we are, not quite there? And I think it was that negotiation. Yeah. And the fact that they were part of that discussion just automatically changed the relationship as well. So it's taking everyone along. I think universally has worked. Yeah.
It's also trying to create a safe space for your teams, right? In those 100%. Environments. Have you done anything differently over the years? I mean, you've led some very diverse teams, right? And large teams, coming from a consulting and advisory background to then being, in the corporate world. Do you do anything differently in terms of trying to create that creative space and safe space for your teams, knowing that it could be a pretty turbulent environment?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's probably been one of the biggest parts of my personal learning and growth as well. I think early on in my career, when I was a new people leader, it was a lot about me. I'm not proud to admit that, but that's the truth. Because I suddenly felt like, I had worked this hard, I had done so much, and finally now I had the title and the authority. It was all about me, and I could not be more wrong. Sadly, I learned that lesson the hard way. I made amends where I could and where I needed to as well. But I think that was that learning of going, it's actually not about you at all. It's all about the people that you're leading. It's how do you support them? How do you create space for them? And it's not one big thing is probably what I learned as well. I think my early leadership would have been big statements and, big visions and all of that grandiose stuff. I don't do that anymore. I actually, to be honest, am probably sitting too much on the other side because it's so much more about listening and understanding and creating that space. And it's showing up every single time for those people. Some days it's about they actually made a mistake in the work that they're doing. Another day it was like missed a deadline, or another time it could be they're dealing with something at home while there's a big deadline here as well. And how do you show up in those moments for your people, with your people? I think that is what builds that trust and creates that safety over time as well. And in that, again, you will probably not always get it right because you don't always know what's happening on the other side and the why. But if you can create the space that people can have that conversation and you've got a better understanding of where each person's coming from, I think that often helps. And another thing that I think I changed, coming from India to Australia, I think one of the things, cultural differences that I observed, I find Australia is a very polite society.
Except if you go to the footy.
I do not go there, so I do not know what you're talking about. Here's an admission that will not serve me well. But typically, and in a corporate setting, we are expected to be a polite sort of society. And I think we over-egg on the politeness. I think I'm much more a kind person than a polite person. And kindness for me is honesty in the relationship. Because you know what, if you do blow up a big deliverable, for me to be just polite and go, it's all good, no problem, that's not honest. And that's not kind, because if they keep making those mistakes, that's not going to serve them and their career as well. So I actually go bringing that honesty, and that conversation may not feel very nice and polite, but I think it's kind. Yeah. So I think that's probably another thing that has helped me build a rapport. And I always would preface it with, I'm telling you this because I believe in you, I care for you, and it doesn't mean you have to be brutal about it, but you've got to be honest about it. I think shying away from it is not the way to go. And unfortunately, I see that happening a lot. Yeah. You can see something's wrong, but no one will articulate it for you. And then there will be a decision made somewhere about that person. And I go, why could we just not talk about it? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's probably another thing that creates safety. Yeah. Anyone who's worked with me, hands down, at least in the last decade, would go, yeah, they will always know where I stand. And
I suppose you can politely sweep something under the rug.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. I don't subscribe to that at all, because I don't think it serves anyone, not even the person you're trying to be polite to. So then why do it? Yeah.
So as a female CEO of a multi-billion-dollar organization, do you feel like you have to do more? Do you feel like you've over the years faced more challenges, or are the expectations even more on your shoulders and the pressures around that?
100%. I don't think I saw it early on, because I think I used to live in my bubble a little bit and do good work, and then you get what you get. But then I think when you open up the perspective, I do feel I'm a migrant woman of color who doesn't even go to footy. There's so much that's riding against me, right? So I do feel that I've often had to work twice as hard to get only half as far. And it's hard. It's difficult. And you talked about, being a female CEO. There was another anomaly in there that was actually harder than all of those things, which was being an unconventional choice. I did not come from a background where I had run the commercials, managed clients, or managed a P&L. And the people who I was leading at the time knew so much more about that business, about the clients, had been doing it for 2 decades. And for me to turn up and go, I'm now the new leader, it was hard. And I think it took time to build that credibility and trust with them. So yeah, I think there's all these obstacles. Every time you're a little bit different to the norm, whatever that difference is, you are pedaling sort of against the tide, and it's harder and it's slower. Yeah.
Do you ever feel that because of your gender or your background being a migrant, you had to lead differently, you had to behave differently? Whether it's softer or more assertive, whatever.
Yeah. I think I'll separate that, because I think by the time it came to me leading, I had changed how I think about myself. So I think I felt in the early years that I had to be different. And I did try hard to fit in. I did try and listen to music that still does nothing to me. I don't listen to that music anymore. I did turn up at footy, and this is a hilarious story, but in the consulting world, corporate, my boss takes me to the footy, we're taking a client, and this is my first time. And I was like, I have no idea why I'm here or what I'm even looking at. And then as the crowd cheers, I'm expected to cheer. So I cheered, and the boss turned around and was like, you have no idea what's happening to you. I said, I have no clue, because I cheered for the wrong team.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So yes, I think there were moments of I tried hard to fit in. And there's some really bad advice out there. I think every time I get the opportunity, I go, the advice, nice girls don't get a corner office. So you try and be a certain kind of girl. I made all those mistakes in the early years. But I think fortunately for me, by the time I came to a position that I was leading people, I had gotten over that. And I said, this is me, take it or leave it. because I realized that I was a better person, a better professional when I was comfortable in my own skin. It didn't mean that the world was kind to me being myself. It made that a little bit harder, but I felt I was more prepared and more able to fight the fight that I needed to. When I wasn't being myself, I felt like it was a failure even before I started because I just couldn't be myself. So yes, I'm fortunate that shift came a little bit before I started leading people.
Gotcha.
And I just am who I am, and I lead unapologetically. And I think it served me well. So
was there a watershed moment, like this pivotal point in your career where the light bulb switched on and you were like, I'm just exhausted leading this other life?
I think there was one, and I don't really feel the need to name organizations and things, but there was a point in my career when the performance conversation that we were having, I think the leaders at the time, they basically went from, I wish we could clone Ruby, to, hey, you need to be part of the dynamic more. And I was like, what does that actually mean? It was like the team went for karaoke's, on a Friday, the drinking, because all the people had kind of grown together in that team. And, it was lots of drinking, lots of partying, passing out at each other's couches. And I was always absent. And I think it stuck out of saying, oh, Ruby's not part of the team. I think what probably they didn't know or didn't care for was that I had a young child who was very sick, and I was studying, doing my master's degree, and I was working enormously hard, and hence I thought that they wished they could clone themselves. But then this was the advice that I got in terms of what would progressing in my career look like. And I was like, no, thank you. And I think for me, my daughter at the time was just so important. And I needed to be there for her. I already wasn't there for her enough. And I was like, I'm not cutting into it anymore. Probably that was a big, big moment of shift for me.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah. So now you're wiser, you're more experienced, right? Is there any advice that you'd give to emerging young leaders or young female leaders about navigating this brave new world that we're in?
Still getting wiser, still lots to learn.
Very good. Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm anywhere near where I need to be.
Yeah. Every day is a learning day, right?
Yeah. I think the word that I used earlier was kindness. I think that's probably the one thing that I would share with, and particularly ambitious people as well, because we talked about being kind to everyone around you, but we often forget to be kind to ourselves. I've tried very hard to be kind to others, but I know that there have been many times in my life that I've been very unkind to myself. We sometimes are on harsh as critics. We sometimes don't find the balance in our lives. And I'm still struggling to find that balance. I'm still nowhere near there. But I think it's just that one trait that universally, if we start from that place, it just sets you up to achieve what you need to achieve, to get where you need to get, and also to deal with the setbacks along the way as well. Because no matter how successful you are, I always say life and careers never look like your LinkedIn profile. They never do. There's always, setbacks, turnarounds, and all of that as well. But kindness helps you navigate those. And be very good at what you do is probably another bit of advice, and particularly for female leaders. Because I find that the overwhelming advice for women is to be a certain way, which is very much the soft skills. We were talking about be assertive, be this, be that. And all of those things are important to have the right, emotional intelligence, how you show up and how you do things. But I don't think any of that matters if you're not good at what your job is. And I think we often get too caught out in that and leave the core of your work, probably a bit underserved as well. So I go, be very good at what you do, be kind to others, be very kind to yourself, and you've got the core foundation to then go wherever you need to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How important do you think mentors are within that journey that you've just mentioned?
I think really important. But I see mentors different to the typical mentoring model that I see in the industry of, you find a person who then coaches you or mentors you along the way as well. I think for me, my best mentors haven't necessarily been somebody who I've been attached to consistently or sought their advice.
Yes.
I think it was the points in time. I think some of the most defining pieces of advice in my career, they become my mantras, have come from those mentors. And that's because it came at a pivotal point in my career when I needed a different perspective, not because the scheduled mentoring chat has come up in the diary and I need to have a conversation. So it was very different for me. But I think those pieces of advice I swear by, and they've really taught me and set me up well. So I think it's really important. But equally important are sponsors in your life as well.
Yes.
So I think to learn as an individual and grow as an individual, you need mentors. But I think to progress in your career, you need sponsors. So you need both.
I think they're very different, though.
Very, very different. Yeah. Very different.
Over the years, I've consistently had different mentors in different parts of the world. Now, I think I can call on 5, but it's never something that is in the diary 3 months from now. It's as and when.
Yeah.
And they are, I hope they are, very happy for me to send them an email or WhatsApp saying, do you have some time this week for a quick 30-minute chat? I want to pitch something to you. Or I'm really struggling with something at the moment. Can I have a shoulder? And that has been great because I've been able to, over 15 or 20 years, build up those 5 relationships. So they all know me relatively well over my journey. Yeah. And they can call my bullshit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And I think that's what's needed from a mentor, to be quite independent and to say, do you know what? I think you're full of shit at the moment. Right?
100%.
This is how I know you. And at the moment, you're not being you.
Yeah.
Right? And I love that because sometimes you just need that kick up the butt.
Absolutely. Right? We all have our blind spots, right? We wouldn't be human if we didn't have them. So let's not pretend that we know it all, we can see it all. And sometimes you do need somebody to go, and that's kindness to me. Yeah. That is the kindest thing somebody could do to me is go, hey, look in your blind spot here. Exactly. What's going on? And absolutely. And I think when I look back, when I said I can categorically remember, it was literally those people in those moments who were just so honest and showed me a perspective that I couldn't see on my own. And that set me up well. Yeah.
When you were younger, coming up through the ranks of, jumping into leadership roles and getting more senior, how did you go about seeking mentors? Was it a conscious effort of you to put yourself out there and to say, hey, I like what this person is doing. I want to reach out. I want to have a cup of coffee and build a relationship. Was it kind of just happen and progress? I'm quite interested in helping others go on that journey because a lot of people come up to me and say, hey, I want a mentor. How do I go about doing it?
Yeah. I think I never sought out a mentor, ever. But I do have mentors. And I think where the relationship started for me was not reaching out and saying, hey, can you mentor me? It's because something pivotal happened. So I'll give you an example. This is me, at probably one of those points in life when I was truly in a leadership sort of growth phase of my career. And I had a really good run. I was kind of the poster child, the golden girl, and all those things as well. So, and had consistently been sort of going at a rate that I was like, this is actually finally it's happening for me. And then suddenly, in a matter of days, it just completely turned. And I was hit so hard. I was like, what happened? How did I go from being a poster child to now? And it was very, very confronting for me. I don't think I had anything that big happen. I don't think I had anything that big happen that quickly. Yeah. And I was like, whoa, I was reeling from it. And I didn't know how to recover from it, frankly. I would have been pretty lost. And I then decided I needed to understand because I could not understand what had happened. Like I just couldn't, no matter what I did. So I then, a couple of senior leaders who were involved, who understood the situation, what had happened, I went and asked them. I said, it is what it is. I'm not disputing where things are at. Help me understand, where did I go wrong? What did I miss? What should I have done differently? You can always do things better, right? No matter what the situation, what the outcome. And lots of people gave me some really good advice. Oh, you could have thought about that differently. Maybe you could have positioned that differently. And that was good advice. And I took a lot of that on board. Some I was like, I don't think so. And, that's most advice. You take it with a pinch of salt and take what sits well with you. But there was one person who said nothing about the situation, who said nothing about what had happened, who said, Ruby, I know some things went really well, some probably not so well. I can give you a list of both things, but I know that you know that already. There's actually nothing in that list that I can tell you that you don't already know. So I'm just going to tell you something completely different. I'm going to tell you that, remember, when things are going wrong, it's not all because of you. So don't be so hard on yourself.
Yeah.
Also, when things are going well, it's not all because of you.
Goes both ways.
And that was gold. That was gold. Because you know what? In that moment, it helped me say that, yes, things weren't right. And yes, I could have done things differently. But no, it wasn't all my fault. There was a lot of circumstances, culture, other things. That besides the point. But I think that shaped who I am as a leader and how I work with my people. How I work with them when things go wrong, but also when, they're going swimmingly well as well. So having their back when things go wrong, but also making sure there's credit their way as well. So just that one profound piece of advice, I've then gone back to that person many times in my career saying, hey.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because I saw the value in that advice and I've consistently had that with them. But I've probably done that 3 times in 10, 15 years, right? But that's all I needed.
Right?
And absolutely, they're a big mentor for me. But yeah, I think that's sort of how my mentoring relationships have often happened. And yeah, I think a few others I can think, probably similar patterns. Nothing going crazy wrong, but a learning point of how do I see and approach my leadership differently.
I think that's where a lot of people get it wrong with mentors, is that they think it's a constant conversation that needs to happen every month.
No.
It depends on where you are in your career and what it is you're doing.
Yeah.
But I think that's where it often peters off, is that you feel like because it's scheduled every month that you have to say something, you have to come to the party with something profound. And normally,
no,
you're actually, it's okay. Like the last 4 weeks have been okay and you don't need it, right?
I think that regular, consistent conversation, I put that much more in the coaching category, where there's a particular skill set that you're trying to develop and you want to track progress of that along the way, right? So that can be a time-boxed, consistent check-in, but that's much more coaching, mentoring we've discussed, and sponsorship is when you don't even know that's happening for you.
I think we need to go down a whole new podcast on the difference between a manager, a mentor, and a coach.
Oh, 100%.
Right? Because I think people think they're the same thing. Right?
I think, and I will not go down that rabbit hole, as you said, it can take a whole podcast. But one of the big things that I think I've been reflecting, particularly in the last 6 months, that I've taken a little bit of a small career break and I've had the opportunity to reflect on things. It is so much rhetoric that's thrown around in the corporate world. And I think with the social media, we were chatting about it earlier, we live in a world of sound bites.
Yeah.
Right? One tagline, one hook line, one sound bite, and a lot of cliche terms, being authentic and being this and being that. But really what it means and how do you live that truth is never linear, never same for people, often circumstantial as well. But I think we need to move away from that sound bite and just latch on to the next word.
Yeah.
I often talk about we live in a world where we're just inundated with so much information. Like even personally, I go, my head is always swimming with stuff. how do you extract knowledge out of it? But then how do you actually take the real wisdom out of it? Mm-hmm. And I think we just never cross that. It's very rare that you go from information to knowledge to wisdom. Yeah. And I think a lot of what we're talking about, leadership traits and things that we do, that very much stay in that informational soundbite world. And it's counterproductive, actually. It's very counterproductive. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Ruby, thank you so much for being a part of the show. It's been fantastic hearing about your journey along the way. And if I could just take one thing out of this, it's that whole idea of just being kind.
Yeah.
Right? That's something that really stuck out for me during the conversation. But now, before we end, if you could write a letter to your younger self as she was starting her journey and her leadership journey, what would you like to say?
I would have said be kind to yourself, but I've said it so many times. I think find the balance. And I'm still telling myself that. I think I often skew too much towards one thing or the other. I think finding the balance is really hard. And I don't mean the work-life balance. I feel it's more about finding the balance inside of you. It is such a hard battle. We're drawn to so many things, so many priorities, particularly when you're women. There's that added expectation, in the family and other settings as well. I think if I could give myself one piece of advice, I would start looking for that balance and actively working on it a lot sooner than I did. I would have been further along, which is still a work in progress for me. But yeah.